I never thought a pair of heated gloves would land me in the middle of a police investigation. But here we are in suburban Phoenix, Arizona, where the HOA president just committed theft right in front of my security camera. My name is Nathan Morrison, and I moved into the Sunridge Meadows community 6 months ago after accepting a job transfer from Seattle. The development looked perfect online with its beige stucco homes, desert landscaping, and promises of a peaceful community. What the real estate photos didn't show was the reign of terror operated by our HOA president, a woman named Brenda Patterson, who somehow managed to make everyone's life miserable while maintaining a smile that never reached her eyes. I work as a software engineer for a tech startup, which means I spend most of my time in my home office staring at code and debugging problems that would make normal people weep. The Arizona heat was brutal compared to Seattle's mild climate, but I adapted. What I couldn't adapt to was Brenda's constant harassment over the most ridiculous violations imaginable. My mailbox was half an inch too far to the left according to community guidelines. My desert willow tree had 3 branches that allegedly extended beyond the approved canopy radius. She even cited me for having my garbage bins visible from the street for 7 minutes past the designated time on a Tuesday morning. But yesterday's incident crossed every line imaginable. I had ordered these expensive heated gloves online because I still do some winter photography trips back to Washington, and my old pair finally gave out after 5 years of loyal service. These weren't cheap. We're talking about $240 volt resistance heated gloves with rechargeable lithium batteries, touchscreen compatible fingertips, and 7 different heat settings. They arrived in the late afternoon while I was in a video conference that ran way longer than expected. My doorbell camera caught everything. I watched the footage after the fact, and I still couldn't believe what I was seeing. The delivery driver placed the package on my front porch at 4:37 in the afternoon. The box sat there untouched for exactly 18 minutes. Then Brenda walked up my driveway like she owned the place, which technically she didn't, despite how she acted. She wore her usual outfit of khaki capris, a floral blouse that looked like it came from a clearance rack in 2003, and those white tennis shoes that middle-aged women seem to love. Her blonde hair was pulled back in that signature Karen bob, and she carried her ever-present clipboard like a weapon. She looked around, checking to see if anyone was watching. Then she picked up my package, tucked it under her arm, and walked away. Just like that, bold as brass in broad daylight, I discovered the theft when my meeting finally ended at 5:15. I had gotten the delivery notification on my phone, so I went to grab the package before starting dinner. Nothing on the porch. I checked around the sides of the house thinking maybe the driver had placed it somewhere else. Still nothing. That's when I checked my doorbell camera footage and watched Brenda steal my property. My first instinct was to march over to her house and confront her directly, but I'd learned enough about dealing with difficult people to know that wasn't the smart play. Instead, I called the non-emergency police line for Phoenix PD. The dispatcher answered after 2 rings. Phoenix Police Department non-emergency line. "Hi, I need to report a theft that was caught on my security camera," I said, keeping my voice calm and professional. "What was stolen, sir?" "A package from my front porch. The box contained heated gloves worth about $240, and you have video evidence of the theft, crystal clear footage. I can see exactly who took it and when." The dispatcher took down my information and address. "An officer will be out to take your report. Given that you have video evidence, someone should arrive within the next 2 hours. I thanked her and hung up, then made myself dinner while I waited. I wasn't even particularly angry at that point, just amazed at the audacity. Brenda had been a nuisance for months, but I never expected her to actually commit a crime. Officer James Kowalski arrived at 6:45. He was a younger guy, probably in his late 20s, with a professional demeanor and an actual interest in doing his job right. I invited him inside and pulled up the doorbell camera footage on my laptop. We watched Brenda steal my package together. "You know this person?" Officer Kowalski asked. "That's Brenda Patterson. She's the HOA president for this neighborhood, lives 3 houses down on the left side." He raised his eyebrows. "Your HOA president stole your package?" "Apparently so. She's been citing me for ridiculous violations since I moved in, but this is a new level." Officer Kowalski took detailed notes and had me email him a copy of the video footage. "This is actually pretty straightforward. Clear video evidence, known suspect, definite theft of property valued over $100. That's a Class 1 misdemeanor in Arizona, could even be elevated depending on circumstances." "What happens next?" I asked. "I'll go speak with Miss Patterson and confront her with the evidence. If she returns the property and admits to taking it, we might be able to resolve this without formal charges, but that's partly up to you. Given the value and the clear intent shown in the video, we could absolutely pursue charges if you want." I thought about it for a moment. Let's see what she says first. If she admits it, returns my gloves, and gives me a genuine apology, I might be willing to let it go. But if she denies it or gives you any trouble, I want to press full charges. "Fair enough. Let me go talk to her. I'll be back shortly." Officer Kowalski left, and I watched through my window as he walked down the street to Brenda's house. Her porch lights were on, and I could see movement inside. The officer knocked on the door and waited. This is where things got interesting. Brenda answered the door with that same fake smile she always wore. I couldn't hear what they were saying from my house, but I could see the body language. Officer Kowalski was calm and professional, showing her something on his phone, probably the video footage. Brenda's expression changed from confused to indignant to panicked in the span of about 30 seconds. She started gesturing wildly, clearly trying to talk her way out of the situation. Officer Kowalski remained calm, occasionally pointing back toward my house. The conversation went on for about 10 minutes before Brenda finally disappeared back inside her house. She emerged a minute later carrying my package, still unopened. Officer Kowalski took the package from her, exchanged a few more words, then headed back to my house. Brenda stood in her doorway looking like someone had just told her the world was ending. The officer returned with my package and a bemused expression. Well, that was quite the conversation. She initially tried to claim she was holding it for safekeeping because she was worried about porch pirates in the neighborhood. I laughed despite myself. "We've never had a problem with porch pirates." That's what I figured. When I pointed out that taking someone else's mail or packages without permission is theft regardless of intent, and that the video clearly showed her looking around to make sure no one was watching, she changed her story. Said she made a terrible mistake and got confused about which house she was at. Her house looks nothing like mine. Different color, different landscaping, and it's 3 houses down. I mentioned that too. Eventually, she admitted she took it and claimed she was just so stressed from all her HOA duties that she wasn't thinking clearly. She asked me to convey her deepest apologies and said she'd like to apologize to you in person if you'd allow it. I examined my package. The tape was still sealed and nothing looked tampered with. Did she say why she actually took it? Officer Kowalski glanced back toward Brenda's house. Between you and me, I think she's got some control issues and was probably planning to use this as leverage over you somehow. She made a few comments about how you've been problematic with HOA compliance, which tells me this was more about power than actually wanting your gloves. That sounds about right. So what are my options? You've got your property back and it's undamaged. Miss Patterson is clearly scared and embarrassed. If you want, we can let this go with a warning. I'll file a report documenting everything, so if she ever does anything like this again, there's a record. Or you can press charges and we'll take her in for theft. With the video evidence, it's an open and shut case. I weighed my options carefully. Part of me wanted to throw the book at her just for all the months of petty harassment. But I also knew that having her arrested might make living in this neighborhood even more difficult if she somehow retained her position. Let's do this, I said finally. I want a written apology from her, and I want her to come over here and apologize in person tomorrow. I also want it documented that if she retaliates against me in any way through the HOA or otherwise, I will pursue charges retroactively. Is that possible? Officer Kowalski nodded. I can't enforce the apology as part of the criminal process, but I can certainly convey your terms. And yes, the report will be filed regardless, so if there's any future retaliation, this incident is documented as potential motivation. You'd have a strong case for harassment if she starts targeting you more. Then, let's go with that. I just want to live in peace without worrying about my mailbox measurements or phantom tree violations. Understood. Let me go explain this to her. I have a feeling she'll be very agreeable to your terms. Officer Kowalski headed back to Brenda's house while I opened my package and examined my new heated gloves. They were perfect, exactly what I'd ordered. I plugged in the battery packs to charge them and watched out the window as the officer had another conversation with Brenda. This one was shorter. Brenda nodded repeatedly, looking relieved. Officer Kowalski returned one final time to confirm that she'd agreed to everything. She'll be over tomorrow morning at 10 to apologize in person. She's also going to write you a formal letter of apology. I made it very clear that any retaliation or future incidents would result in immediate charges for this theft and potentially additional charges for harassment. I don't think you'll have any more problems with her. Thank you, officer. I appreciate you handling this professionally. Just doing my job. Keep that video footage saved somewhere safe, and if anything else happens, don't hesitate to call us again. After Officer Kowalski left, I sat down and tried to process everything that had just happened. My HOA president had literally stolen a package off my porch, gotten caught red-handed on camera, and was now facing the consequences. It felt surreal. I called my best friend Marcus, who still lived in Seattle. He answered on the third ring. "Nathan, how's the desert treating you?" "You're not going to believe what just happened," I said, and proceeded to tell him the entire story. Marcus listened, occasionally interjecting with disbelieving laughter. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment before saying, "Man, you really know how to pick neighborhoods. What are the odds your HOA president would be crazy enough to steal packages?" Right. I've dealt with difficult HOA people before, but this is a new level of bold. So she's coming over tomorrow to grovel, apparently. 10 in the morning. You need to record that conversation too, just in case she tries to turn this around on you later. That was actually good advice. Arizona's a one-party consent state, so I can legally record without telling her. Do it. People like that don't change overnight. She might act apologetic tomorrow, but I guarantee she's already planning how to make your life hell without getting caught. We talked for another hour about work, friends back in Seattle, and whether I was planning to stay in Arizona long term. After hanging up, I spent some time researching Arizona HOA laws and discovered some interesting information that would become relevant very soon. That night, I barely slept, partly from anticipation and partly from genuine curiosity about how Brenda would handle the apology. I'd seen people have to eat humble pie before, but never someone who so clearly believed they were untouchable. The next morning arrived with typical Arizona sunshine and temperatures already climbing into the 70s, despite it being February. I made coffee, ate breakfast, and set up my phone to record audio and video of the conversation. At exactly 10 o'clock, my doorbell rang. Brenda stood on my porch looking like she'd aged 5 years overnight. Her usual confident posture was gone, replaced by hunched shoulders and fidgeting hands. She wore nicer clothes than usual, a business casual outfit that looked like she was heading to court rather than a neighbor's house. I opened the door and stepped outside, deliberately not inviting her in. "Brenda, Nathan, thank you for agreeing to see me." Her voice was subdued, none of the usual condescending tone I'd grown accustomed to. "I want to start by saying how deeply sorry I am for what I did yesterday. Taking your package was wrong, illegal, and completely inexcusable. There's no justification for my actions, and I take full responsibility." She handed me an envelope. "This is a written apology explaining everything. I also want you to know that I've stepped down as HOA president effective immediately. The board had an emergency meeting this morning after I explained what happened, and we all agreed it was the right decision." That caught me off guard. "You resigned?" "Yes. What I did was a betrayal of the trust this community placed in me. I can't effectively lead the HOA after committing theft against one of our residents. Derek Holloway is taking over as interim president until we can hold proper elections next month." I opened the envelope and read the letter. It was surprisingly well written and genuinely contrite, acknowledging the theft, the abuse of her position, and the pattern of harassment I'd experienced since moving in. She even admitted that she'd been unfairly targeting me because I'd questioned some of her decisions during a community meeting shortly after I moved in. "This is a good letter," I said honestly, "but I need to understand something. Why did you actually take my package?" "Officer Kowalski said something about leverage, but I want to hear it from you." Brenda's face reddened. "I was angry at you. You've been resisting my authority since day one, questioning my decisions, refusing to simply comply with citations without pushing back. When I saw the package on your porch, I had this irrational thought that if you had to come to me asking for help finding it, you'd finally show me some respect. I know how insane that sounds now. I wasn't thinking clearly, and I let my ego and need for control override my common sense and basic decency. There was something almost therapeutic about hearing her admit all this. "Have you done this to other residents?" She hesitated, then shook her head. "No. I've been overzealous with enforcement and probably too strict with interpretations of our CC and Artic S, but I've never stolen from anyone else. Yesterday was a moment of complete insanity that I regret more than I can express." I studied her face, looking for signs of deception. All I saw was genuine shame and embarrassment. "Okay, I accept your apology. I'm not going to press charges as long as you hold up your end of this agreement. No retaliation, no more harassment, and no more abuse of the HOA position which you've now resigned from anyway. We're neighbors, and I'd like to move forward with a clean slate." The relief on Brenda's face was palpable. "Thank you, truly. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I appreciate it more than you know. If you ever need anything, or if you have any concerns about the HOA going forward, please feel free to reach out to Derek. He's much more reasonable than I've been." After Brenda left, I went back inside and watched the recording to make sure everything captured properly. It had. I saved multiple copies in different locations, just to be safe. The rest of the day was surprisingly quiet. I worked on a project deadline, tested out my heated gloves by cranking the heat setting in my office, and generally tried to return to normal life. But I couldn't shake the feeling that this situation wasn't entirely resolved. That evening, I received an email from Derek Holloway introducing himself as the new interim HOA president and requesting a meeting to discuss my concerns about the neighborhood. I appreciated the proactive approach and agreed to meet him the following afternoon. Derek turned out to be a retired accountant in his early 60s with a calm demeanor and an actually reasonable approach to community management. We met at a local coffee shop called Desert Beans, a place I'd discovered shortly after moving to the area. First, let me apologize on behalf of the entire HOA board for how you've been treated, Derek began after we'd both ordered coffee. I've reviewed all the violations that Brenda issued to you, and frankly, most of them were ridiculous. The mailbox positioning thing was within acceptable tolerances according to our actual guidelines. The tree branch issue was based on a measurement method that doesn't match our CC and Articus. And the garbage bin citation was just petty. I appreciate you saying that. It's been frustrating feeling like I'm being singled out. You were being singled out. Brenda admitted as much in our board meeting yesterday. Apparently, she took offense when you questioned her interpretation of the guest parking rules during that community meeting back in August. She's been harassing you ever since. I sipped my coffee. So what happens now with the HOA? We're going to do a complete review of all our enforcement practices and make sure everything aligns with our actual governing documents. We're also implementing a new appeals process so residents can challenge citations without fear of retaliation. And we'll be holding elections next month for all board positions, not just president. It's time for some fresh perspectives and better leadership. That all sounds positive. I'd actually like to volunteer to help with the governing document review if you need assistance. I've been reading through them anyway, and I have some thoughts. Derek smiled. I was hoping you'd say that. We need people who are willing to participate and help make this community better. Would you consider running for a board position during the elections? That caught me off guard for the second time in 2 days. Run for the HOA board. Why not? You're clearly intelligent, you care about proper procedures, and you're not afraid to speak up when something's wrong. Those are exactly the qualities we need. I thought about it while we discussed other neighborhood issues. The idea of actually being part of the solution rather than just complaining about problems appealed to me. Before leaving the coffee shop, I told Derek I'd seriously consider running for a board position. Over the next few weeks, life in Sunridge Meadows improved dramatically. True to her word, Brenda kept her distance and didn't cause any problems. Derek proved to be an excellent interim president, communicating clearly with residents and making decisions based on actual rules rather than personal whims. I decided to run for a board position and spent time talking to my neighbors about their concerns and frustrations. Turned out, I wasn't the only one who'd been on the receiving end of Brenda's overzealous enforcement. Several other residents shared their own stories of petty citations and harassment. One neighbor, Helen Chen, had been fined $200 for having the wrong shade of beige paint on her front door, even though the color was clearly within the approved palette. Another neighbor, Robert Jefferson, had received a violation notice for having a vegetable garden in his backyard that was supposedly visible from the street, which it absolutely wasn't. The more people I talked to, the more I realized how toxic Brenda's leadership had been for the entire community. The election meeting was held on a warm March evening in the community clubhouse. Nearly 80% of the neighborhood showed up, a record turnout according to Derek. The energy in the room was engaged and positive, completely different from the tense, fearful atmosphere that had existed under Brenda's regime. Brenda herself didn't attend, which was probably wise. Her husband showed up briefly to cast their household vote, but he left quickly without talking to anyone. I ended up winning a seat on the board along with 3 other new members, all people who wanted to see real positive change in the community. Derek was elected as the official president with overwhelming support. Our first priority was revising the enforcement policies and creating an actual reasonable approach to community management. One of the most interesting developments came about a month after the glove incident. I was working in my home office when I noticed unusual activity at Brenda's house. A moving truck was parked in the driveway, and workers were loading furniture. I walked outside on the pretense of checking my mail and ran into a neighbor, Susan Martinez, who lived next door to Brenda. "Are they moving out?" I asked. Susan nodded. "Putting the house up for sale. Brenda told me they're relocating to Nevada to be closer to their daughter. But honestly, I think she just can't face the shame of what happened. Everyone knows about the theft, and she's completely isolated herself these past 2 months." I felt a twinge of something, not quite guilt but maybe empathy. "That's got to be hard." "She brought it on herself," Susan said firmly. "Do you know she gave me 6 violations last year for stupid things like having my porch light on past 10 p.m. I'm not sorry to see her go." Watching the moving truck pull away later that day, I reflected on how a single poor decision can completely derail someone's life. Brenda had let her need for control and power corrupt her judgment, and now she was literally fleeing the community she'd once ruled. My heated gloves, meanwhile, became something of a legend in the neighborhood. People joked about them being the catalyst that finally brought down Brenda's tyrannical HOA regime. Someone even suggested we should display them in the clubhouse as a memorial to proper community governance. I declined that suggestion, but I did share the full story, including the doorbell camera footage, with the new board members as an example of why proper oversight and accountability were essential. We implemented new rules requiring all HOA actions to be documented and reviewed by at least 2 board members before enforcement. We also created a transparent appeals process and opened up all board meetings to full community participation. The transformation of Sunridge Meadows was remarkable. Neighbors who'd previously avoided community involvement started showing up to meetings and volunteering for committees. People actually enjoyed living here again, instead of walking on eggshells, worrying about the next ridiculous violation. My own experience improved dramatically too. No more petty citations. No more harassment. I could park my car, tend my landscaping, and live my life without constant scrutiny from someone on a power trip. The heated gloves themselves performed excellently during my next photography trip to Washington. I spent a weekend shooting the North Cascades in late winter conditions, and my hands stayed toasty warm even in sub-freezing temperatures. Every time I adjusted the heat settings, I thought about the bizarre journey these gloves had taken from my front porch to Brenda's house to a police evidence discussion, and back to me. Derek turned out to be not just a good HOA president, but also a good friend. We started getting coffee regularly to discuss both neighborhood business and life in general. He introduced me to other reasonable people in the community, and I finally started feeling like Sunridge Meadows was actually home rather than enemy territory. About 6 months after the incident, I received an unexpected letter in the mail. It was from Brenda, postmarked from Henderson, Nevada. I debated whether to even open it, but curiosity won out. The letter was surprisingly humble. She wrote about her therapy sessions and her journey toward understanding why she'd become so controlling and aggressive as HOA president. She talked about her own childhood growing up in a chaotic household and how she'd overcompensated as an adult by trying to control every aspect of her environment. She acknowledged that this wasn't an excuse, but rather an explanation for behavior she deeply regretted. The letter concluded with another apology and a genuine wish for my happiness and success. She mentioned that she'd seen online that I'd been elected to the HOA board and thought it was wonderful that I was channeling my experience into making the community better. I showed the letter to Derek during our next coffee meeting. "That's quite something," he said after reading it. "Think it's genuine?" "I do, actually. Therapy seems to have helped her gain some perspective. I hope she's doing better." "You're more forgiving than I'd be." "She made a lot of people miserable for a long time." "True. But holding on to anger doesn't help anyone. She faced consequences for her actions, lost her position, and had to move away from her home. That's punishment enough." Derek raised his coffee cup. "Here's to second chances and better community governance." We clinked cups and moved on to discussing an upcoming neighborhood barbecue we were organizing. The barbecue ended up being one of the most successful community events in Sunridge Meadows history. Over 100 residents showed up, including families with kids, retirees, and everyone in between. The atmosphere was relaxed and genuinely friendly, people laughing and sharing food and actually enjoying being part of the community. Helen Chen brought incredible homemade dumplings. Robert Jefferson showed off produce from his backyard garden, which was now officially allowed under our revised community guidelines. Someone set up a volleyball net, and an impromptu tournament broke out. Kids ran around playing tag while parents socialized without worrying about violating some obscure HOA rule. I manned the grill for a while, flipping burgers and hot dogs while chatting with neighbors I'd never really met during Brenda's reign. The difference in community morale was night and day. As the sun set and the Arizona sky turned brilliant shades of orange and purple, I found myself reflecting on the strange journey that started with a stolen pair of gloves. That single incident of petty theft had cascaded into a complete transformation of our neighborhood's governance and culture. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus back in Seattle. He was checking in to see how things were going and whether I still liked living in Arizona. I looked around at my neighbors laughing and enjoying themselves, at the community I'd helped reshape into something positive, and texted back, "Absolutely. Best decision I ever made." The weeks turned into months, and life continued to improve in Sunridge Meadows. The new HOA board worked efficiently and fairly, addressing legitimate concerns while avoiding the petty tyranny that had characterized Brenda's leadership. We repainted the clubhouse, updated the playground equipment, and organized regular community events that brought residents together. I continued my work as a software engineer, but I found myself increasingly invested in the neighborhood and HOA responsibilities. It was satisfying to be part of something larger than myself, to help create a community where people actually wanted to live rather than feeling trapped by arbitrary rules and vindictive enforcement. One interesting development came when we discovered that Brenda had been misappropriating HOA funds during her tenure. Nothing massive or criminal, but she'd been approving payments to her nephew's landscaping company at rates well above market value. And there were some questionable expense reimbursements for things that didn't quite align with legitimate HOA business. Derek brought this information to the board during a closed session. We're looking at roughly $8,000 in questionable expenditures over the past 3 years. Legally, we could pursue this, but it would mean hiring lawyers and potentially reopening everything with Brenda. The board discussed it at length. Eventually, we decided to let it go. The amount, while significant, wasn't worth the time, expense, and drama of legal action. We implemented strict new financial controls to prevent future misappropriation and moved forward. Sometimes the cost of justice exceeds the benefit. My photography hobby continued to flourish, and I started offering free classes to interested neighbors. Every other Saturday morning, a small group would meet at sunrise to practice landscape photography around the neighborhood and nearby desert areas. The heated gloves made an appearance during one memorable January dawn session, when temperatures dropped into the low 40s. "Are those the famous stolen gloves?" asked Patricia Hammond, one of the photography group regulars. "The very same," I confirmed, wiggling my toasty warm fingers. "They should be in a museum," she joked. "Right next to the mailbox that was apparently half an inch out of position," I added, and everyone laughed. These were the moments that made community living worthwhile. Shared jokes, shared experiences, and genuine connections with the people around me. As the 1-year anniversary of the glove incident approached, Derek suggested we do something to commemorate the transformation of the neighborhood. Not focusing on the theft itself, but celebrating how the community had evolved and improved. We organized a Community Appreciation Day with food trucks, live music from local bands, and activities for all ages. I was asked to say a few words about my experience and the journey we'd all been on together. Standing in front of 150 of my neighbors on a beautiful Arizona evening, I kept it simple and heartfelt. When I moved to Sunridge Meadows 18 months ago, I had no idea what I was getting into. I certainly never imagined that a pair of heated gloves would become the catalyst for positive change in this community. But here we are, and I couldn't be happier with how things have turned out. This neighborhood isn't perfect, but it's ours, and we're building something special together. Thank you all for being part of this journey and for making Sunridge Meadows a place where people actually want to live. Here's to many more years of good community governance, reasonable enforcement, and neighbors who look out for each other. The applause was genuine and warm. Derek took over to discuss upcoming projects and improvements, and I stepped back to grab some barbecue from one of the food trucks. Helen Chen approached me with a plate of her famous dumplings. "Those were good words, Nathan. You've been really good for this community. We all have been." It's amazing what happens when people work together instead of against each other. True. Though I have to ask, do you ever regret moving here? Given everything that happened with Brenda, I thought about it honestly. Not for a second. Bad situations either break you down or make you stronger. This one made all of us stronger and brought us together. Plus, I got a great story out of it and some excellent heated gloves. Helen laughed. "Those gloves are going to follow you for the rest of your life here. I can think of worse legacies." The party continued late into the evening. Kids played in the bounce house we'd rented while adults mingled and enjoyed the perfect weather. The community band played classic rock covers that were surprisingly good. Someone organized an impromptu dance floor, and I watched in amazement as neighbors of all ages joined in. This was what community was supposed to feel like. Safe, welcoming, and genuinely enjoyable. Later that night, sitting on my back patio under the Arizona stars, I thought about the chain of events that had led to this moment. A woman consumed by control issues had stolen my property in a moment of poor judgment. Instead of just letting it slide or handling it informally, I'd involved the police and insisted on proper accountability. That decision had rippled outward, exposing deeper problems within the HOA and ultimately leading to systemic change that benefited everyone. The heated gloves sat on my desk inside, charging up for another upcoming photography trip. They were just gloves, practical tools for keeping my hands warm in cold weather. But they'd also become a symbol of standing up for what's right, of not accepting abuse or misconduct just because it comes from someone in a position of authority. My phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. It was Marcus calling from Seattle. "How was the big community party?" he asked. "Really good. Great turnout, good energy, everyone having fun. Hard to believe this is the same neighborhood from a year ago. You did good, man. Not everyone would have handled that situation the way you did." I just wanted my gloves back and some accountability. Everything else kind of snowballed from there. That's how change happens, though. One person stands up, others follow, and suddenly you've got momentum. Think you'll stay in Arizona long term? I looked out at my desert landscaping and thought about the community I'd become part of. Yeah, I think so. Seattle will always be home in some ways, but I've built something here. It feels right. We talked for another hour about various topics before saying goodbye. After hanging up, I went inside and started working on some photo editing from the previous weekend's sunrise shoot. The images captured the stark beauty of the Arizona desert, all those dramatic shadows and golden light that made this landscape so compelling. Around midnight, I finally shut down my computer and headed to bed. Tomorrow was another day of work deadlines and HOA responsibilities and the normal flow of suburban life. Nothing dramatic or exciting, and that was perfectly fine with me. The next few months passed in a comfortable rhythm. Work projects came and went. HOA business was handled efficiently and fairly. The photography group continued to grow, now including 15 regular members. Life was good in Sunridge Meadows. Then, on a random Tuesday in August, I received an unexpected email from an attorney representing Brenda Patterson. My stomach dropped as I opened it, fearing some kind of retaliation or legal challenge. Instead, the email explained that Brenda had been working with her therapist on making proper amends for her past behavior. As part of that process, she wanted to compensate me for the stress and harassment I'd experienced during her tenure as HOA president. The attorney had prepared a settlement offer of $5,000 with no strings attached and no requirement to sign any kind of non-disclosure agreement. I read the email 3 times to make sure I understood correctly. This wasn't a legal demand or an attempt to buy my silence. It was a genuine attempt at restitution. I called Derek to get his perspective. "That's unexpected," he said after I explained the situation. "What are you going to do?" "I'm not sure. Part of me wants to accept it because it feels like genuine closure. Another part feels weird taking money from someone who's clearly already suffered consequences." "What does your gut tell you?" I thought about it. "That she's trying to do the right thing in the way she knows how. And that accepting it might actually help her move forward more than rejecting it would." "Then accept it. Use the money for something positive. Donate it to a community cause or put it toward those photography classes you've been teaching. Turn something negative into something good." That was solid advice. I responded to the attorney accepting the settlement offer and explaining that I'd be donating the money to fund photography equipment for underprivileged kids in the Phoenix area. It felt right to take something that came from conflict and use it to create opportunity for others. The money arrived a few weeks later via bank transfer. I researched local programs and ended up partnering with a nonprofit that provided arts education to low-income youth. The $5,000 purchased 10 decent cameras, memory cards, cases, and basic editing software. The program director nearly cried when I delivered the equipment. "This will change lives," she told me. "These kids have so much talent but no resources to develop it." Seeing those kids' faces light up when they received their cameras reminded me why standing up against injustice mattered. Brenda's theft of my gloves had been wrong, but holding her accountable had led to positive change that extended far beyond my own situation. Word got around the neighborhood about the donation, and several other residents expressed interest in supporting the program. We organized a fundraiser that brought in another $8,000, enough to expand the program to include video equipment and advanced editing classes. The local news picked up the story and ran a feature about how an HOA dispute had ultimately led to opportunities for disadvantaged youth. They interviewed me, carefully avoiding the specific details of what had happened with Brenda while focusing on the positive outcomes. Sometimes conflict can be constructive if people are willing to do the work of turning it into something positive, I said during the interview. Our neighborhood went through a difficult period, but we came out stronger, and now we're able to help kids who need it. That's the best possible outcome. The segment aired during the evening news, and I received dozens of messages from friends, neighbors, and even strangers thanking me for the work. It was humbling and slightly overwhelming. Marcus texted me after seeing the clip online. "From stolen gloves to local hero, that's quite the character arc." I laughed and texted back. All I wanted was to keep my hands warm during photography trips. This escalated significantly, but it was true. What started as a simple theft had cascaded into community transformation, and now youth education opportunities. The ripple effects of that one moment when I decided to file a police report instead of letting it go had been profound and far-reaching. As fall arrived and the Arizona heat finally became bearable again, I found myself reflecting on everything that had happened over the past 18 months. I'd moved to a new state, dealt with HOA harassment, experienced theft, helped reform community governance, made genuine friends, and created opportunities for kids who needed them. The heated gloves still worked perfectly, keeping my hands warm during early morning photography sessions as temperatures dropped into the comfortable range. Every time I turned them on, I remembered that moment of seeing Brenda on my doorbell camera footage, taking that package so brazenly. I wondered if she had any idea how her single moment of poor judgment would ultimately lead to so many positive changes. Probably not. People rarely see the full consequences of their actions, especially the unexpected ones. One Saturday morning, as I was leading the photography group through a session at Papago Park, one of the newer members asked me about the story behind the gloves. I'd warned them despite the relatively mild 50-degree weather, more out of habit than necessity. "It's a long story," I said with a smile. "We've got time," Patricia said. "Sunrise isn't for another 30 minutes. So I told them the whole story, from the initial harassment to the theft to the police report, to Brenda's resignation to the community transformation to the youth program donation. The group listened in rapt attention. "That's an incredible story," said James Thornton, a retired teacher who joined the group recently. "You handled it exactly right. Not too aggressive, but firm enough to create accountability. That's a rare quality." "I just wanted my gloves back," I repeated for what felt like the 100th time. "But you could have let it go or handled it informally. Instead, you insisted on proper process and consequences. That matters. That's how societies function properly." The sunrise that morning was spectacular, painting the desert landscape in brilliant oranges and reds. We all captured dozens of images, experimenting with different exposures and compositions. As I worked, I thought about James's words and realized he was right. The principle mattered more than the gloves themselves. Later that week, I received another unexpected communication, this time a handwritten card from Brenda herself. No return address, just a Henderson postmark. The card was simple and brief. Thank you for accepting my settlement offer and for using it so generously. I saw the news story about the youth photography program. It made me happy to see something good come from my mistakes. I hope you and the Sunridge Meadows community continue to thrive. With genuine gratitude and respect, Brenda. I showed the card to Derek during our regular coffee meeting. She's really trying to make amends, Derek observed. That takes courage, especially after everything that happened. It does. I hope she's found some peace wherever she is now. You're more forgiving than most people would be, I shrugged. Holding grudges takes energy I'd rather spend on positive things. She faced consequences, made restitution, and is apparently working on being a better person. That's all anyone can ask for. Derek changed the subject to HOA business. We had a proposal to upgrade the community pool and needed to figure out financing without raising dues too dramatically. It was the kind of normal, mundane governance challenge that should have been Brenda's legacy if she just led with reason instead of ego. The pool upgrade ended up passing with strong community support. We hired a reputable contractor, stayed on budget, and completed the project in time for the summer season. It was a textbook example of how HOA projects should work: transparent communication, fair process, and results that benefited everyone. My heated gloves made their most important journey yet when I traveled to Alaska in late September for a serious photography expedition. The temperatures ranged from 20 to 40 degrees Fahrenheit, and I spent long hours shooting landscapes, wildlife, and the northern lights. My hands stayed warm and functional throughout, allowing me to adjust camera settings and change lenses without the numbness that usually plagued cold weather shooting. The images from that trip ended up being some of my best work ever. I put together a gallery showing at a local Phoenix art space, with proceeds benefiting the youth photography program. The opening night drew a huge crowd, including many of my neighbors and HOA board members. Helen Chen stood in front of my favorite image, a shot of the aurora borealis reflecting in a perfectly still Alaskan lake. "This is breathtaking, Nathan. You've got a real gift." "Thanks." That was from the last night of the trip, when conditions finally aligned perfectly. I stood out there for 3 hours waiting for the lights to get active enough. "Wearing your famous heated gloves, I assume," I grinned. "Of course. They're basically a permanent part of my cold weather kit now." The gallery showing raised another $3,000 for the youth program. Combined with ongoing donations from community members, we were able to expand it to serve 50 kids instead of the original 10. The program director told me they had a waiting list of over 100 kids wanting to participate. "We're changing lives here," she told me during a visit to see the kids work. "Several of these students are already talking about careers in photography or videography. They have talent and passion. They just needed someone to give them a chance." Watching those kids show me their images with such pride and enthusiasm reminded me why all of this had mattered. Yes, Brenda stealing my gloves was wrong. Yes, holding her accountable was important. But the real victory was what came after: the transformation of a toxic community into a supportive one, and the extension of that positive energy outward to help others. As the 2-year anniversary of moving to Sunridge Meadows approached, I took stock of my life and felt genuinely content. My career was going well with a recent promotion and raise. My photography had evolved from hobby to semi-professional work that generated both income and satisfaction. My community involvement gave me purpose and connection. I'd built a life in Arizona that felt meaningful and rewarding. The heated gloves sat in their usual spot in my camera bag, ready for the next adventure. They were just gloves, simple tools for a specific purpose. But they'd also become part of my personal mythology, a reminder that standing up for what's right can lead to unexpected positive outcomes. Derek called me one evening with interesting news. "You're not going to believe this, but I got a message from someone who lives in Brenda's new HOA community in Nevada." "Really? What did they want?" "Apparently Brenda has been telling people there about what happened here, and using it as an example of how not to run an HOA. She's been advocating for reforms in her new community based on the lessons she learned. This person wanted to know more details about how we restructured our governance." That's actually really positive. She's taken her experience and used it to help others avoid the same mistakes. Right. I gave them some information about our new procedures and policies. Who knows, maybe something good will come of it there too. After hanging up with Derek, I felt a sense of closure I hadn't realized I was still seeking. Brenda had gone from being my antagonist to being someone who'd learned from her mistakes and was actively trying to do better. That kind of growth and self-awareness was rare and worth acknowledging. The seasons continued their cycle. Winter brought mild temperatures and busy work schedules. Spring brought wildflowers and photography expeditions. Summer brought heat and pool parties. Fall brought relief and community events. Through it all, life in Sunridge Meadows hummed along smoothly under competent, fair leadership. I continued serving on the HOA board, finding satisfaction in helping solve problems and improve the community. We tackled projects large and small, from repairing sidewalks to organizing neighborhood watch programs to planning the annual holiday light display competition. The youth photography program continued to flourish, expanding to include mentorship opportunities where students could shadow professional photographers. Several of the original participants had their work featured in local exhibitions and competitions. One student received a full scholarship to art school based partly on portfolio strength developed through the program. These were the real consequences of that moment when I chose to file a police report instead of letting a theft slide. Not just getting my gloves back, but creating a cascade of positive change that touched dozens of lives directly and hundreds indirectly. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Coming to Phoenix for a work conference next month. Want to grab dinner and see your famous neighborhood?" I smiled and texted back, "Absolutely. You can meet all the characters from the stories I've been telling you." Having Marcus visit would be great. He'd heard all the stories secondhand, but seeing the community in person would give him the full picture of how much things had changed and improved. The visit happened on a warm November evening. I picked Marcus up from his hotel, and we drove through Sunridge Meadows while I pointed out various landmarks and explained the history. "That's Brenda's old house, now owned by a nice retired couple. That's where Derek lives, our HOA president. That's the clubhouse where we have community events and board meetings. That's the pool we renovated last year." Marcus looked around approvingly. "This is actually really nice. Normal houses, normal people, no sense of that oppressive atmosphere you described from before. That's the difference good leadership makes. When people aren't worried about petty enforcement or arbitrary violations, they can actually enjoy where they live." We had dinner at a local Mexican restaurant where I'd become a regular, and I introduced Marcus to several neighbors who happened to be there. Everyone was friendly and welcoming, treating him like he was already part of the community just by association with me. "Your life here is really solid," Marcus observed over enchiladas and margaritas. "Career going well, community involvement, creative outlet with photography, making a difference with the youth program. Seattle misses you, but I get why you're staying. It wasn't the plan when I moved here. I just wanted a job change and some sunshine. Everything else kind of built from there. Starting with stolen heated gloves and a Karen HOA president," I laughed. "Starting with that, yes. Though calling Brenda a Karen feels a little unfair now that she's done so much work to make amends and grow as a person." "Fair point. She did the work and earned some redemption. Not everyone does that." We talked late into the evening about life, career, relationships, and the paths we'd each taken. Marcus was doing well in Seattle but contemplating his own move, possibly to Portland or Denver. I encouraged him to be open to unexpected opportunities, since my unplanned move to Arizona had worked out so well. Driving him back to his hotel later, Marcus said something that stuck with me. "You know what's impressive about your story? You didn't let someone else's bad behavior define your experience. You took action, created accountability, and then built something positive from it. Most people would have either let it slide or gotten bitter and angry. You did neither." "I just wanted my heated gloves back," I said one more time, but we both laughed because we both knew it had become about so much more than that. After dropping Marcus off, I drove home through the quiet streets of Sunridge Meadows. Porch lights glowed warmly. Well-maintained houses stood in neat rows. Desert landscaping rustled softly in the evening breeze. It looked like 1,000 other suburban developments across America, but it was mine, and I'd helped make it a good place to live. The heated gloves were waiting in my office, fully charged and ready for an upcoming trip to Colorado. They'd keep my hands warm while I photographed winter landscapes in Rocky Mountain National Park. They'd continue doing their job, simple and effective, while carrying the weight of an unlikely story that had changed a community. Sometimes the smallest things become catalysts for the biggest changes. A pair of stolen gloves, a doorbell camera, a decision to insist on accountability rather than letting something slide. These small moments matter because of what we build from them. As I settled into bed that night, I felt grateful for the journey, all of it. The frustration with Brenda's harassment had been real and valid. The shock of discovering the theft had been genuine. The decision to involve police had been difficult but necessary. And everything that followed had been worth it. Sunridge Meadows was a better place because one person refused to accept misconduct from an authority figure. The youth photography program existed because someone chose accountability and then channeled settlement money toward positive impact. Dozens of lives had been touched and improved because of a series of choices that started with insisting on getting my heated gloves back. That's the real story here. Not that an HOA president stole something and got caught, but that the consequences rippled outward to create lasting positive change. The gloves were just the beginning, the spark that lit a fire of community transformation and meaningful impact. And now, 2 years later, I could look back and see the full arc of what had happened. From conflict came accountability. From accountability came change. From change came growth. From growth came opportunity. And from opportunity came impact that extended far beyond the original incident. The heated gloves would continue keeping my hands warm during photography adventures for years to come. But they'd also always represent something more, a reminder that standing up for what's right, even in small matters, can lead to unexpectedly significant outcomes. Sometimes you get more than your stolen property back. Sometimes you get a transformed community, meaningful friendships, and the satisfaction of making a genuine difference in the world around you. That was worth far more than $240.